If you ever wanted to give your photos a cinematic cyberpunk look, this is one of the easiest ways to do it. In this video I will show you how I turned this photo I took in Chongqing, China into a neon lit scene with glowing highlights, rich colors, while keeping a dark atmospheric feel. So let me walk you through the adjustments that make the biggest difference, when this look works best, and what to keep in mind while shooting so you can recreate it in your own photos. So here I'm inside Lightroom and I added 3 different photos I took in Chongqing. And to be honest, obviously the conditions were amazing. Chongqing is, if you haven't heard or if you haven't seen it on Instagram before, it's this kind of cyberpunk city that already gives you a lot of great conditions to shoot cyberpunk style photos. I'm gonna use these as examples, but essentially what you're looking for are moody conditions, meaning you're looking for haze, blue hours, so right after sunset, maybe even at night, locations with a lot of lights and potentially not even normal street lights but actual colored lights, so red lights, blue lights, yellow lights. It doesn't really matter what kind of lights or LEDs, but the more contrast you have between highlights and shadows and color, I feel like the better result you're gonna get. The key is when you shoot something like this to preserve as much highlights as possible without underexposing your image too much. You can achieve this by looking at your histogram while you shoot. Basically, you don't want too much information on the right side and not too much information on the left side. Oftentimes it's okay to have your image a little bit more on the darker side just because it's more forgiving to expose shadows and try to preserve or to save highlights where you don't have any information. It's similar to when you take a photo outside in broad daylight and the sky is overexposed and it's just white, you won't get any information back of the cloud's shape. First off, when tackling the cyberpunk look, there are a couple of things I like to keep in mind. The teal and orange look works wonders. Here, as you can see, we have a lot of different colored lights. So we have red lights, we have orange lights, we have yellow lights, we have blue lights, and even maybe like purple lights and other colors. In the very beginning, you want to scroll down all the way where you can see color calibration. Of course, it depends on your image, but I like to go for something like 50 for red primary, 50 for green primary, and like -50 for blue primary. And just like this, we already have a split tone effect where all of the warmer tones tend to be more of like an orange color and all of the cooler tones tend to be more of like a blue tealish color. To adjust the breakpoint of where this split is going to happen, you can scroll all the way back to the top, and under white balance you can basically tell Lightroom if the image should be more on the warmer side or more on the cooler side. Oftentimes I prefer the cooler side while all of the orange LEDs are still orange and not too blue, because if I would go all the way to the left, I lose all contrast of the light separation. Let's choose somewhere like here maybe. Next up, let's adjust exposure. Keep the histogram in mind, maybe somewhere like here. For dark image like these, where we have too little information on the dark sides anyways, I actually don't like to increase contrast, but to decrease contrast, because it actually provides a little bit of like a hazy look and adds just a tiny bit more information. And for the highlights, because when I shot this, I intentionally didn't overexpose my highlights, I can rather now increase the highlights in post rather than in camera. Of course, this depends, because if you have LED signs, for example, with like text on it, you may need to decrease your highlights so that the text or whatever is on the LED sign is visible, but I can show you that in a second with another image. Also for shadows, I like to increase it by a lot just to get a little bit more information back, maybe something like 55 in this case. And for blacks, let's decrease it just to get a little bit of that contrast back, maybe like -40. When it comes to texture, clarity and dehaze, this very much depends on what you're going for, what style. Oftentimes when I go for like a dreamy, hazy look, I like to decrease clarity. But to be honest, in most cases when it comes to this kind of cyberpunk style, I like to increase clarity just by a little bit, maybe like +10, because I feel like if I zoom in here into the buildings, for example, because if I decrease it, there's not much of an effect because the highlights still stay very clear and in shape, and it just makes the image more muddy. But by increasing clarity, I just get a little bit more detail back. So let's go back to 20 and even increase texture by 5. And dehaze, again, depends on whether or not your image is very hazy or if you're going for that look. Let's also here go for 5 to get a bit more sharpness and contrast back. Before jumping to vibrance and saturation, I like to adjust the tone curve, because even if I adjust the tone curve, this matters because this also affects the saturation of the overall image. So I always prefer to adjust the tone curve before. Normally, typical S curve works wonders. It also helps to just even out highlights and shadows throughout the image a bit more. more, maybe something like this. And we can even roll off the whitest highlight by just decreasing the top by a bit and even making the blacks more like very darkish gray. Jumping back to vibrance and saturation, I like to use vibrance for people and saturation for landscape. So in this case, I will probably just increase saturation by a bit, maybe like 20, to get this very punchy look. Then if I scroll down to color mixer, here you basically want to increase that split look of teal and orange even more. That means push all the sliders that are still not teal even more towards teal or light blue, and everything that's not orange even more towards orange. So here in red, let's go more in towards the orange directions. Orange can stay orange, and yellow a little bit more to the left. Green a little bit more to the right. Teal or aqua in this case can stay this way, and blue a little bit more towards the teal direction. And especially in this case, this blue has like a huge effect on this overall image because it basically affects all the sky. And even for purple, we can go extreme, and for pink as well. The intensity and saturation depends on what you're looking for. I oftentimes like to increase my reds and slightly decrease the luminance. For yellow, I like to increase the luminance and also increase the saturation. For green, I like to desaturate my greens and decrease my luminance. For teal or aqua, I like to increase the saturation and also increase the luminance. For blue, I actually like to desaturate my image a little bit, but still increase luminance. And purple, also decrease saturation and increase luminance, and the same for pink. Also, I just noticed I skipped orange. So for orange, I like to increase saturation and also increase luminance. Then for color grading, you can either leave it like that, or if you want to affect your image a little bit more, you can go to your shadows and just add a little bit of blue, maybe like 20, and then jump to your highlights and add a little bit of orange as well, maybe like 15. Denoising, sharpening, it depends again very much on what you're looking for and how your image was shot. I like to leave chromatic aberration because even if I use a cheapo lens, that basically just adds a little bit more character to my image. And oftentimes these like cyberpunk images are a little bit more on the side where the image has more, so to speak, character. Of course, if you want to go for that analog film-like look, you can add a little bit of grain, maybe like 15 and 20 in this case, just to like very subtle add a little bit of texture to the image. And lastly, also again, jump to calibration, and I like to maybe decrease the reds and the greens by a little bit, maybe like -10 for the red. And if you're happy, you can again check your white balance, whether or not you like it more orange or more blue. I think somewhere like here is amazing for that image. And again, check your exposure, maybe increase it if you think your image is too dark, or decrease it if you think your image is too bright. And maybe I go for somewhere like here and instead push my whites just a little bit more towards the right to get back more of that brightness in the higher tones. Also, I feel like here in the shadows or midtones, this could be a little bit darker, to be honest. So let's jump back into the tone curve and just decrease it by a little bit, maybe like here. But now the contrast is too dark. So I'll go to contrast again and decrease the contrast by a bit, maybe like here. And I'm pretty happy at that point. Of course, now you can like jump in even more and add masks to increase and improve your image even further. But let me just copy this look and apply it to my other images as well. So here I was standing at a rooftop in Chongqing in China, and if I paste it, it almost works straight out of the box. The only things I adjust basically all the time is exposure and temperature again. So check temperature if you want your image to be more blue or more orange, and obviously exposure as well. Maybe something like this could be really nice. And for the last image right here, let me also paste my color grading, decrease exposure by a bit. And what I mentioned in the beginning, here are some signs that you can't basically see anymore because they're just like too blown out. And unfortunately, that's like the balance that you have to strike between whether or not you want your highlights to be more pronounced, or if you actually want to see what's on these signs when there's text or something else on it. But if you want to have more information out of your signs again, just decrease your highlight by a little bit so you get more information back. It's always a trade-off. So actually, let's take a look at the overall image and see whether or not it makes sense to decrease the highlights. Like if I decrease it too much, maybe I actually like that in this case, because here the signs are more pronounced. And if I would go more towards the right, it looks nice because the lights and the signs are a little bit like hazy and it creates this atmosphere almost. But maybe in this case, actually, let me turn down the highlights so I can see the signs better and therefore increase exposure by a little bit. Amazing. Let me also quickly show you the before and after. So for this image, we started here on the left side and ended up here on the right side. For the second image, we started here on the left side and ended up on the right side here. And of course, the images we started with, you can see there's like a huge difference between how the colors are pronounced, how the highlights work, and even how the colors are interpreted. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know what else you want to see. With that being said, thank you again for watching until the very end, and I will catch you in the next one.